All right, welcome everyone to the Xojo webinar. I am Paul Lefevre, the Xojo Developer Evangelist. And our topic this time is file type sets. Probably won't be a super long webinar this time. We're going to go over this and take any questions. So what are file types? Well, they describe files that are used by your apps. And they help identify the contents of these files, text files, picture files, PNG files, JPEG. Everything's a type. Often the extension is used to identify types of files, of course. You've seen the TXT extension used for text files, HTML used for HTML files, stuff like that. File selectors can be restricted to only show files of a specific type. Very handy if you're prompting your user for a file. You want them to only select specific files, picture files. If you're going to be showing a picture, you don't want them to necessarily select a text file or something like that. File types can also be used to display a custom icon with the actual file in the file system. How this works varies by operating system, of course, but we'll talk a little bit about that. And they can also be used to control which app is the default app for opening the file. So if in your system's Finder or Explorer or whatnot, you double click on the file, which app is it going to open? And you might want it to open your app and then have your app open the file. Now in Xojo, you can add a file type set to your projects by going to the Insert menu and just picking File Type Set. When you do this, you get a File Type Set editor that is displayed when you click on your newly added file type set. And much like file types in general, the file type set editor allows you to specify the specific file types that are used by your desktop apps. And because this is a file type set, you can actually have different types within the set. And that can be handy sometimes if you want to have types for different, say, pictures, PNG, JPEG, something like that. You could have those as separate types, but include those in a single set that's called, images or pictures or something like that. We'll look at the file type set editor in a moment, but there's two things you can note for the types of file types, no pun intended. They can be set as imported, which means your app is using the type, the file of that type, but does not own that type. It's not an owner of that type. An example of that would be pretty much any of the common types that are available in the file type setter, but something like PNG. Your app is probably going to may use pictures, may use PNG pictures, but it's not the owner, more than likely, of PNG pictures. That probably is the default preview app on OS X, for example. And you're not likely to want to be monkeying around with that in your own app because that can affect how the operating system operates, greatly confusing your users. The other way you can specify your file type is to identify it as exported. Now, an exported type is one that your app uses, but is also the owner of. So this is essentially, you can think of this as like a custom file type. It's a file that essentially is pretty unique to your own app. No other app's really going to have any reason to use it, more than likely, but regardless, your app is the primary owner of it. There are also common file types, of course. These are the non-custom ones, the generic things, text, HTML, PNG, JPEG, stuff like that. And of course, I talked about custom file types. You can also specify the icons that appear for file types, typically custom file types. And again, how you do that varies by operating system. So this is what the file type set editor looks like in Xojo. Here there are two file types that are added to the set editor. The top type is a PNG type, and you can see there's a variety of properties that are associated with it. Most of these properties are really only needed for OS X. The others, they're not used on the other operating systems. And then you can see there's also a custom file type as well. And you can see the various components of it. We'll look at this more closely when we jump into Xojo. But it gives you a feel for the various parts of a file type that you can specify. File types are covered in the user guide at these two URLs. You can see them right here. We'll jump over to take a quick peek at it. So let's see here. I need to switch. That's not going to switch. This will switch. All right. So there's two sections of the user guide, the using file type sets that covers what we're going to talk about today in a bit more detail, and then also the file type set editor that primarily just covers the editor itself and describes the various fields and whatnot. So you can head on over to those sections of the docs to read up more and learn more about how those work. Now, there are some platform differences with how the file type set editor is going to work and how you're going to configure it and how you need to configure things for the various OS platforms. Now, first, file selection is going to work the same on all the platforms. So if you create a file type set, you put some file types in it, and you use the file selection, the get, open, folder item stuff, and specify your file type, it will restrict what's shown in the list of files for the user, so they can only pick from files of the appropriate type. But the other parts are platform specific. Now, in the case of OS X, the file type set editor provides all the fields that you need to fill in. We'll look at what they are when we get to Xojo, but essentially what it does, it takes that information that you fill in on all those fields and it sticks it into the plist for the app. And that's part of the app bundle. There's a file called info.plist that describes behaviors for the actual app. And all this file type stuff that you've specified in the file type set editor get included in the plist. This is really nice because then everything kind of just works on OS X. You don't have to do any additional configuration or anything like that. So very nice and easy on OS X. On Windows, you need additional registry settings that have to be added by your installer in order for certain features of file types to work, primarily icons and the auto opening of an app when you double click on a file. And there's no way around this. That's how Windows works these days. The registry settings have to be made. It's not something your app can add itself. It has to be done by the installer. The app can't add it because, generally speaking, it's not going to have permissions to change this part of the registry. And you're certainly not going to want your Windows app to be in the middle of when it's running, attempting to elevate user permissions so they can modify the registry. That's probably not going to go over well, especially if the user is set up as not an administrator. They're going to be greatly confused by your app prompting to essentially make registry changes. So it needs to happen at installation time, and it needs to be done by your installer. And we'll take a look at what that means by taking a look at an inno setup installer script. And you can see there's just a few lines you have to add to the installer. But it's not something that Xojo can handle automatically for you, so you do have to do it. And you also are going to need to have your icon, should you want to have a specific icon for the file type, specified as an ICO file in the location that the registry can point to so that it can use it to display with the files. So a bit of manual work on Windows. And of course, Linux, well, if you think Windows is kind of a pain in the butt, Linux, as per its usual, is a little bit more of a pain. And I'll say right up front, I have yet to get the file type icons to properly display on Linux. Probably because there's some setting somewhere that I'm still missing. But the general gist of it is that you need to update a MIME types file in the etc folder, and you are going to need to update or get the images to another system location where they can be referenced. And my Googling around on this seems to indicate that the location where these images belong seems to vary depending on the Linux distribution you're using, among other factors, of course. So I don't yet have any specific steps for how to configure out the icons for file types on Linux just yet. Still looking into that. If I get something working, I will have that written up and added to the documentation. But I wanted to just call out that it certainly is possible, but as in the case with a lot of things Linux related, not entirely obvious. All right, so now we're going to jump over to Xojo in a moment here, and we're going to take a look at OS 10 and see a couple examples of how file types are configured there and how they work. We'll also take a look at Windows, take a look at an inno setup installer script, and see how that all works. So let's see if I can switch over here to Xojo. All right, before I jump into this, I see I got a question here from Edwin. If I create a text file and set it as exported, will that only affect my own text file? No, it will not only affect your own text file, it will affect everything that has that specific UTI configured. So you don't want to take over the generic TXT file. You could certainly use a TXT extension, but you're going to want to use different settings in the UTI fields in the file type set for OS 10, so that you do not take over the system text file setting. Otherwise, if someone were to double click on a text file and expect it to open and say text edit or something else, it could possibly be opened by your app, which certainly is not really behavior you want to be stealing. All right, so first example, actually, I don't have that one open, so I thought I had it open. Yeah, here it is. So this one here is a little PNG example, and it's just showing how to open and create PNG files. So it's using a common file type that's set as imported, as you can see here. And to add this type, all I did was click the little button here, and I picked PNG. I didn't change any of the other settings. All right, so you can see there's just two options here. This one shows the file type selector. So you can see here, this brings up the file selector, and you can see most things are grayed out because they're not PNG files. But the things that are identified as PNG files, I can click on and select. So that's the file selection capability. The save option allows you to save a file that will get marked as PNG. And you can see that I already had one out here, but it saves out here as a PNG. And in the case of OS 10, it shows a preview for picture files for you automatically. So you can see, but it's a standard PNG. If I were to double click on it, it's going to open in preview, not my app. And that's the behavior generally I'm going to want. All right, going back to that project, you can see here, looking at the code, nothing too fancy here. The big thing is that in the call to displaying the file selector, I include the name of the type that I want here. So this is in my image file type set, and I want the PNG type that's in there. I can use, if I had multiple types in there, I could use, I believe, .all to get them all. I could add different types together if I had just specific ones I want to use. All the various different things that you can do are noted on that doc page. So you get some flexibility there. But that's really, you just have to specify that. And then once you do that, the file type selector will only show those types of files, and then your code can work just as it normally would. And similarly with the save, You also can specify the type when you're requesting from the user the name of the file, and then that file will get saved as that particular type. Nice and clean for you. So this functionality works the same across all the platforms. We'll look at this app running on Windows and on Linux as well in a moment. And then the other one is the file type set example. This creates a custom file type. It's actually saving a text file, but it's going to be a Xojo. It's going to be owned by this particular Xojo app that I've made, and I'm using the extension Xojo Text. So it is actually a text file. You could actually drag it into some other text editor and look at it. It just contains plain text. But if it were double clicked, it's going to open my app here. So you can see, looking at this is a custom type. So it was added by using the plus button. I gave it a name, and then I filled in the various things here: display name, extension. You're obviously going to want an extension and a display name, so those two things are needed. Description's optional. You can just put in, something that helps you understand what the type is. MIME types are also optional. Those are internet types that describe types of files. Not really going to be needed for something like this. It's possible you may need to include it if you wanted to have some additional support for drag and drop on this type of file, maybe. But most cases, you can safely ignore that. The UTI identifier, however, is something you're going to want, is something you're going to need. This has to be included on OS X, and it tells you something about the file. So this here is being used as a unique, and this has to be unique. So you can see right here, commonly on OS X, when you want unique things, you use this reverse domain name method. So com.examples.xojo text. Because generally speaking, domain names are unique, and then your app name would add another level of uniqueness. So it's now unique. So this is a unique identifier for this type of file. OS types relate to legacy values that OS X used for identifying file types. Not really any reason to fill these in any longer. I believe these were 4-character codes. It's really there just for backwards compatibility. I can't see any reason you would be including that on newer apps that you're making. Conforms to is the last thing that's very important to include, required. And this is where you provide the UTI identifier to which your file belongs with. So because my custom file type here is a text file, I've used the public.text UTI as saying it conforms. This means that other things that also conform to that will be able to work with the file. So a generic text editor or something like that. If you had a file, there's all kinds of these values that you can fill in. Again, the docs have links to Apple's dev pages that list them all, but there's public like data for a generic file type that just contains generic data. There's database, there's image types, all that sort of stuff. And if you don't know what you want to put here, you can always go to something like public.data and keep it nice and generic, and then tweak it if you need to. But there definitely has to be something here. Otherwise, your file type's not quite going to work as expected. And this list from Apple it's a hierarchical list. So, I believe, I don't remember the structure off the top of my head, but something like public.data is probably at the top, and then public.text would be one of many things below it. And there's probably public.html that is below public.text. You can see the structure when you go to Apple's docs to decide what to pick. But generally speaking, you don't often have to get that specific. You can stick with stuff near the top of the hierarchy. So the other thing to show here is, you can see the UTI type is specified as exported, since I'm going to own this file. There's also the icon that is specified here. And you can see I've filled in all the various sizes. Very important, you don't really want to be skipping any sizes. And you want to make sure you have both the images and the masks specified. And this here is just a little rinky-dink icon I made. I took a generic text icon and I stamped the Xojo logo on it and decided to use that here. Now this icon will only be used on OS X. You can certainly fill it in But again, when you build for Windows, it's not used in any way on Windows. You're going to have to generate your own ICO file and then provide that. We'll look at that when we get to the Windows side. All right, so if I run this and I click open, we're going to see here the only files that are selectable are the ones of Xojo text. And you can see they have the default icon already appearing here because I saved them earlier. And so that works how I expected, and the same as how PNG worked and all that good thing. And if I want to create a new file, I just type some text and hit save, give it a name, make it smaller so I can see all the buttons. And then if I go back to my Finder, I can see here the new file shows up and it has the icon associated with it. It didn't really have to do anything super fancy right now. However, OS X, to figure out this stuff, does have to do kind of its behind the scenes looking things up. So I've seen that sometimes in order to get these things to appear properly, you might actually have to build your app rather than just running it from Xojo. And this is because of the way OS X looks up these file types and the related icons and whatnot. And from what I've found on the internet, it seems to do this when something is displayed in the Finder or at system launch or login, stuff like that. So it's possible if you're just running from Xojo that OS X might not be able to or do it quickly enough. Go to the debug app, scan its contents to see if there are file types in there, and then add them to the system's database of these sort of things. So often building can solve that problem, and then you run the built version, and then OS X kind of wakes from its slumber, and whatever system process needs to chug does so and logs these things, and everything's all peachy keen. And of course, in order to test the ability for a file to open an app, you'll actually have to have a built app as well. So you can see right here, if I double click this file, you'll see it launched my app and it opened. Actually, I already have the thing open. So let's close everything out there. Make sure it's not running. All right, so now it opened it here and it has the file open. It actually opened two windows. I didn't have it coded to not open a default window automatically. So it opened the default window and then it said, oh, hey, you also double clicked on a file. I'm going to open that one for you as well. But it opened it with the art text. So that all works great. And again, OS X is the easiest one to set this up with, which is nice. Hopefully the other platforms might eventually add something that is as slick as that for us to work with. Edwin is asking if Quick Look works with the file. So I just pressed the space bar on the file here in the Finder, and Quick Look did not recognize that as a text file to show the text contents within it. So I'm not really familiar with how Quick Look does that processing, so I can't really answer how you might be able to make it work with that, but apparently it doesn't do it by default. All right, let's switch gears and go over to Windows now. So which one of these is my Windows one? This one right here. So here I have Windows 10 running, and I got the same two projects open. But I want to start with the PNG one first. So here we have the PNG project, exact same project as OS X. And it'll have the same behavior as well. If I pick the choose button here, it'll go to my folder, and the only things that'll even show in this case are the PNG files and folders that I could possibly expand to see if there are any PNG files in there. But the other files, the Xojo text files and other things that are here, are not even displayed. And of course, I can save something there as well. So that's how that works. Again, that works the same across all the platforms, so nothing too exciting there. But let's move on to the other one, which is different. Now you can see this is, because it's the same file, has the same things filled out. This is the file type set example, and its file type has the same things filled out that were on the OS X side. But these other ones down here aren't used on Windows, so they don't really matter. The icon's also not used on Windows, so it also doesn't really matter if you're just doing a Windows app. Now this will still work for the file choosing, of course, and saving. So if I come here, you'll see the file is the only thing here, and the PNGs are no longer displayed. And it opens up in there. So that's all great. So that works fine from that aspect. But what if you want the double clicking or the icon to appear? All right, well, in order to do that, I have to move some things around on my screen so I can actually reach these buttons on Windows. So let's see if I can figure out how to do that. All right, I'm going to slide this up over here. Okay. All right, what I'm going to do is open Finder or Explorer. So we can see here, I already have the file types showing up, and they have our icon, a little small. So here you can see the custom icon is showing up. Well, and that's great, but how is that showing up? Well, that's showing up because I actually built the app. I have a build out here. And then I created an installer for it using innosetup. So here's innosetup. And this is kind of the sample innosetup script. We have this included in Xojo now in the new release that came out today. And it's also in the docs. You can just search for innosetup. It'll come right up. So this is the example script that lets you create an innosetup installer for a Xojo app. And the new part is this part down here at the bottom for registry. And this is what sets up the file type set. And pretty much you're not going to need to, you pretty much can just cut and paste this, add it to your own installer, and then of course change the values to match what it is you're building. So the extension goes here using the Xojo text extension. And then you just got to give it a name so that it can be referenced on this next one. And then you have to give it the two paths down here to the icon that you want displayed. So you can see here, if I scroll over, there eventually is a path to the icon. And what I have here is that when I build, if I go back to Xojo for a moment, if I look at the build steps for Windows, you'll see I've added a copy files build step that is copying the ICO file I want to use, and it's copying it to the resources folder of the built app. And this allows the registry setting to just say, go to the built app's installation location. This is a little macro in setup. Then go to the resources folder, and that's where you'll find the ICO file to use to display for icons of this file type. And then similarly, you also, if you want this behavior, you add this last one, which will tell Windows which app to open when the user double clicks on your file. So this whole part here at the beginning is the same. You're reusing the file type set example name. That's kind of the way to look it up. But then down here, you use the app variable here to get the installation path of your app. And then you have the actual app name. And then you have to provide the parameter. And that's going to be the name of the file that was double clicked on. And all these quotes do appear to be necessary just in case your file path has spaces in it, from what I understand with Windows. And that's it. Once you do this, you can build your installer in innosetup. You just click the little compile thing, and it'll chug through, grab your built app, create an actual installer. I want to point out the one other setting you do want to add to the file here, which is back at the top in the setup section. The last thing here, there's an action called changes associations equal yes. And you want this to be set to yes so that the installer will essentially ping Windows and tell it to do its registry refresh to reload this data. If you don't have this set to yes here, or you leave it off, the user is going to have to log out, log back in, or reboot, or the usual stuff in order to see the file type changes. But that's it. That gives you your installer, which I actually don't remember where the file ended up. We're not going to run it now anyway, but oh, it's in a testing folder. I have it in a different folder. But you'll end up with an installer that you can then double click. Well, that's what you give to the user. And then when they install it, or you install it on your test system, you're able to test this file type functionality. And I've previously run the installer and installed it. So if I double click on this, you can see it opens up the example. And this time the one that actually has the file is in the back, but there it is. So that's how that works on Windows. Sounds worse than it is, really, because it's really a one-time setup, and then you just build your installer, which you're already going to have anyway, right? So you add these few lines to it, and boom, you're done. All right, the last one we will look at is Linux, and this will be quick because I only have just the PNG one that actually does anything useful. So this here is the same PNG example. And let's see here. So again, it looks the same as it does in Windows and OS 10, and it works the same. If I click the choose button here, I go to my folder, only the PNG files are listed. And if I save, it doesn't. Yeah, now the file is available here in my recently used area, and I can pick that, but it only shows PNGs. So you can see that all works the same still on Linux, but the file types, setting up the icons and whatnot, require those other steps that I haven't yet figured out. Certainly, if anyone watching or listening to this at some point figures out some steps and would like to share them with me, I'm all ears. I'll go through them, test them out, and I'll happily add them to the docs. We can come up with some steps that are clear and make sense. Right now, for Linux, I tried testing with Ubuntu 15. Obviously, there's a bajillion different Linux distributions. I'll probably try Linux Mint next to see if I get different behavior. But so far, no luck. All right, so that's how that stuff kind of works. Pretty straightforward. So to wrap up this webinar this week, I've got a little bit of Xojo news. Today, Xojo 2016 Release 1 was made available. Hooray, just a few hours ago. And this new release adds high DPI, also known as Retina, if you're a Mac person, support for both OS 10 and Windows apps. And obviously, I can't show what high DPI looks like in a webinar like this because it is not going to transmit over the internet high DPI screen data. That would take way too much bandwidth. So unfortunately, you can't really see it when I'm doing this. I am using was using 2016 Release 1 today on OS 10, Windows, and Linux. But you won't notice any different really in the apps as they run here. In addition, the IDE itself, the Xojo IDE itself, on OS 10 is Retina. This is great news for those of you that have Retina screens, newer iMacs, newer Mac laptops. The IDE is super sharp in Retina mode. The fonts are crisp. Your code editor fonts are crisp, sharp, easy to read text. Layouts, crisp and sharp. It's very nice. I much enjoy working in Xojo on its Retina IDE. And of course, as with every one of our quarterly releases, there's all kinds of other fixes and changes, which is you can head on over to the release notes section of the Dev Center to read all about them. I don't have the actual number off the top of my head, but it's over 100, I believe. And of course, you can download it at the usual spot, the download page of the Xojo website. And before we wrap up, I want to remind people of our Xojo Developers Conference. It's coming up later this year in October, actually, in Houston, Texas. And I'm not sure if this was available when I did the last webinar, but the session list is now posted to the XDC page. So you can check out all the sessions that are available there. There's at least 30 that are posted right now, probably a couple more still to come. Registration is open, has been for a little bit. We're already 50% full, which is a little bit ahead of time. We're not usually at 50% this far ahead of the conference. So if you're thinking of signing up or attending, you don't want to wait too long and then be disappointed if it actually sells out, which it has in the past. So definitely head on over to the XDC site, read a bit more about it, check out the sessions. We got a lot of great new presenters coming this year with a lot of different session topics. So if you haven't been to XDC in a while because you're like, well, I kind of saw something about that, you might want to check out this session list again. See, there's probably something new and different on here that you might find catches your eye. And this quote I love from an XDC attendee is, going to XDC is a fire hose of knowledge. All right, so I had a couple questions that I answered while we were going through this. I don't see anything in the queue right now. I'll make sure I get the right window open though. But no, I don't see any open questions, which is fine. I want to remind people that these examples that I showed today are included in 2016 R1. You just go to the examples folder, go to the files folder, and then in there is a file type set folder where the examples are. You can check them out there. And of course, grab 2016 R1, no matter what, play with it, check it out. And got one question here popping up that I can't get to until I close this preview. So, whoops. The only problem with the going full screen on the PowerPoint slide is it kind of locks me out of the controls for Zoom that lets me switch between things. All right, so okay, here we go. Here's the question. Edwin is asking about in the file type window. So if we go back to Xojo, he's asking what these two things right up here are for, the dot and this little indicator. The dot here, and this is all described in the user guide section I pointed out earlier. The dot here will be red initially. So if I add a new type or a blank type, it'll be red initially. It changes to green when you've properly filled in all the icon stuff. And then this indicator here simply tells you whether it's imported or exported. So you can see it changes. So they're just kind of quick. They don't really affect how you can use this or anything like that. They're just kind of quick eyeball ways for you to eyeball how your file type is set up. All right, and with that, I want to thank everyone for attending. Have a great day.